Breaking news from the palace walls. For years, Meghan Markle's story has been wrapped in glitter, mystery, and the kind of silence that makes people lean in closer. But this time, the silence broke from somewhere no one expected. Samantha Markle, Meghan's own sister, finally stepped forward, not with anger, not with gossip, but with something far more dangerous: clarity. She spoke about whispers that had floated for years, whispers that Meghan might have undergone a hysterectomy at just 28 years old. A surgery that changes everything. A surgery that could rewrite the story of Archie, Lilibet, and every strange moment that left people confused and questioning. Samantha didn't yell. She didn't exaggerate. She simply said, "People need to look at the timeline. Nothing adds up unless you know the truth." And just like that, the door cracked open. Behind it stood a story about pregnancies that didn't behave like pregnancies, children who disappeared from public view, and an article that claimed something huge, but offered nothing real. Tonight, we walk through that door. Before we begin, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear isn't conjecture pulled from thin air. This isn't tabloid gossip designed to entertain and disappear by morning. This is information that has been quietly circulating in circles that matter, whispered by people who know more than they are allowed to say, and now, finally, spoken aloud by someone who was there long before the tiaras and the titles. Can you imagine this? A woman stepping into the most scrutinized family on earth, carrying secrets that could unravel everything the public believes about her children, her body, and her choices. And the one person who decides to speak? Her own sister. But here's where it gets complicated. Samantha Markle hasn't always been a sympathetic figure. She's been painted as bitter, jealous, attention-seeking. The media has worked hard to make sure that anything she says comes with an asterisk, a warning label that reads, "Consider the source." Yet tonight, we're not here to debate Samantha's character. We're here to examine her claim. Because if what she's suggesting is true, if there's even a thread of medical reality behind the hysterectomy whispers, then everything, and I mean everything, we've been told about Meghan's pregnancies, her children, and her body needs to be reconsidered. So let me ask you this, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. What if the reason Meghan's pregnancies looked so strange wasn't because of camera angles, designer coats, or conspiracy theories run wild? What if they looked strange because they were? Stay with me. Because over the next hour, we're going to pull apart the timeline, piece by piece. We're going to examine medical realities that most people don't talk about. We're going to look at what a hysterectomy at 28 actually means for a woman's body, her fertility, and her future. And we're going to ask the questions that have been sitting in the back of people's minds for years, but that no one dared to say out loud. This isn't about attacking Meghan. This is about understanding what really happened. And if you're someone who's been watching this story unfold and felt like something didn't quite fit, like puzzle pieces were missing or placed in the wrong spots, then you're not alone. Tonight, we find out why. Let's start with the woman who opened this door, Samantha Markle. For years, Samantha has been the person the media loves to hate. She's been called everything from opportunistic to obsessed, painted as a scorned sibling desperate for relevance in her famous sister's shadow. And maybe some of that is true. Maybe Samantha does carry resentment. Maybe she does feel left behind. But here's the thing about family dynamics, especially in situations like this: pain and truth aren't mutually exclusive. A person can be bitter and correct at the same time. Samantha grew up with Meghan. She watched her navigate Hollywood, climb social ladders, and eventually land in the most famous family in the world. She wasn't on the outside looking in through tabloid headlines. She was there, in the early years, when things were quieter, when Meghan was still Rachel, when the cameras weren't rolling and the PR teams hadn't been hired yet. So when Samantha speaks about something as medically specific as a hysterectomy, we have to ask ourselves, why would she say this? What does she gain by making such a precise, verifiable claim? Sources close to the family suggest that Samantha has been sitting on this information for years. Not because she wanted to protect Meghan. Let's be honest, their relationship is far too fractured for that. But because the implications were so massive, so potentially explosive, that even she hesitated to light the match. But something changed. According to insiders, Samantha reached a breaking point. Watching Meghan play the victim, watching her craft a narrative of abuse and mistreatment while simultaneously erasing family members from her story, watching the world buy into a version of events that Samantha knew was incomplete, it became too much. And so she spoke. Not on a massive platform. Not in a prime-time interview designed for maximum impact. She spoke quietly, almost carefully, in a way that suggested she knew exactly how dangerous this information was.
People need to look at the timeline, she said.
Nothing adds up unless you know the truth. Can you imagine this? Your own sister, standing in front of the world, suggesting that the foundation of your entire public identity, your children, your fertility, your image as a mother, might be built on something other than what you've claimed. Now, before we go any further, let's be clear about what a hysterectomy actually is. Because for those who aren't familiar with the medical specifics, the term gets thrown around a lot. But the reality of the surgery is something most people don't fully understand. A hysterectomy is the surgical removal of the uterus. Depending on the type of procedure, it can also involve the removal of the cervix, ovaries, and fallopian tubes. It's one of the most common surgeries for women, but it's also one of the most life-altering. Once a woman has a hysterectomy, she can no longer become pregnant. Full stop.
There's no IVF workaround. There's no medical intervention that can reverse it.
The ability to carry a child is permanently gone.
Now, here's where it gets interesting.
According to Samantha's claim, Meghan underwent this procedure at just 28 years old.
That's young. Very young.
Most hysterectomies are performed on women in their 40s or 50s, often due to conditions like fibroids, endometriosis, or cancer. For a woman in her late 20s to undergo such a drastic surgery, there would need to be a significant medical reason. So what could that reason be? Sources who followed Meghan's early career suggest she may have dealt with severe gynecological issues that weren't public knowledge. Endometriosis, for instance, is a condition that can cause debilitating pain and, in extreme cases, lead doctors to recommend a hysterectomy as a last resort. It's also a condition that affects about 10% of women of reproductive age, so statistically, it's not out of the realm of possibility. But here's the part that makes people pause. If Meghan had a hysterectomy at 28, and if that surgery removed her ability to carry children, then how do we explain Archer's birth in 2019, when Meghan was 37? How do we explain Lilibet's birth in 2021, when she was 39?
That's the question Samantha wants people to ask. That's the timeline she's pointing to. That's the crack in the story.
Now, some of you watching this might be thinking, well, maybe she didn't have a full hysterectomy.
Maybe it was partial.
Maybe the ovaries were left intact, and she used a surrogate.
And that's a fair point.
That's actually one of the possibilities we're going to explore in depth. But here's the thing, Meghan has never, not once, publicly acknowledged using a surrogate. She's presented both pregnancies as her own, carried in her own body, delivered naturally or with medical assistance in a hospital setting. If that's not true, if there was a surrogate involved, then the secrecy around it raises an entirely different set of questions. Because in the UK, surrogacy isn't illegal, but it is regulated. And more importantly, it's something the royal family would have needed to know about, document, and handle according to protocol. Surrogacy for a child in the line of succession isn't just a personal medical choice, it's a constitutional matter. Can you imagine this? The palace, bound by centuries of tradition and law, having to navigate a situation where a member of the royal family used a surrogate to have children who would be listed in the official line of succession? The legal, historical, and public relations complexities would be staggering.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Right now, let's focus on what Samantha actually said, and why her words carry more weight than people might want to admit. According to those familiar with the situation, Samantha didn't just wake up one day and decide to drop a bombshell.
She's been watching. She's been listening.
She's been seeing the same things the rest of us have seen, the strange belly movements, the inconsistent bump sizes, the lack of post-pregnancy recovery signs, the eerily private births, and she's been wondering when someone, anyone, would start asking the hard questions. And when no one did, she decided to be the one to say it.
Now, does Samantha have proof?
Medical records?
Documentation? As far as we know, no.
She hasn't presented a surgical report or a hospital record confirming that Meghan had a hysterectomy. And that's important to acknowledge. Without hard evidence, this remains a claim, an allegation, a theory. But here's where it gets tricky. Medical privacy laws are incredibly strict. Even if Samantha had access to such records, she legally couldn't share them without Meghan's consent. So the absence of documentation doesn't necessarily mean the absence of truth. It just means we're left in a space where we have to weigh the claim against the observable evidence. And that's exactly what we're going to do over the next hour.
So let me ask you, do you believe Samantha Markle?
Do you think a woman who has every reason to resent her sister would fabricate something this specific, this medically serious, this easily disprovable if false? Or do you think she's speaking from a place of knowledge, even if that knowledge is painful, complicated, and explosive?
Think about it.
Because the answer to that question shapes everything that comes next. Before we move forward, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think Samantha is telling the truth, or is this just another family feud gone public? And more importantly, if she is telling the truth, what does that mean for everything we've been told about Meghan's children? We'll be diving into the medical realities of hysterectomies next, and trust me, once you understand what this surgery actually does to a woman's body, the timeline becomes even more impossible to ignore. Now that we've established Samantha's claim, let's talk about what a hysterectomy actually means for a woman's body, her fertility, and her future. Because if Meghan truly underwent this surgery at 28, then the implications are far more significant than most people realize. A hysterectomy isn't like getting your appendix removed, a surgery you recover from and then move on as if nothing happened. This is a procedure that fundamentally alters a woman's reproductive system. Depending on the type, it can involve removing the uterus, cervix, ovaries, and fallopian tubes. And once those organs are gone, they're gone. There's no going back. Let's break down the types of hysterectomies, because the specifics matter here. Partial hysterectomy. The uterus is removed, but the cervix remains. This is less common but sometimes done in cases where the cervix is healthy and the woman wants to preserve as much of her anatomy as possible. Total hysterectomy. The uterus and cervix are removed. This is the most common type and is typically performed for conditions like fibroids, endometriosis, or abnormal bleeding that can't be controlled through other treatments. Radical hysterectomy. The uterus, cervix, part of the vagina, and surrounding tissues are removed. This is usually done in cases of cancer and is the most invasive type. Hysterectomy with oophorectomy. In addition to removing the uterus, the ovaries and fallopian tubes also taken out. This throws a woman into immediate menopause, regardless of her age, because the ovaries are responsible for producing estrogen and progesterone. Now, if Meghan had a total hysterectomy at 28, which is what Samantha's claim seems to suggest, then her uterus would have been removed. And without a uterus, a woman cannot carry a pregnancy. It's not a matter of fertility treatments or IVF or any other medical intervention. The physical space where a baby grows simply doesn't exist anymore. Can you imagine this? Being told in your late 20s that you'll never be able to carry a child. That the experience of pregnancy, of feeling a baby move inside you, of going through labor and delivery, all of that is no longer an option. It's a devastating reality for many women, one that comes with grief, loss, and a complete reimagining of what motherhood might look like. But here's the thing, women who've had hysterectomies can still become mothers. If the ovaries are left intact, eggs can be harvested, fertilized through IVF, and implanted in a surrogate. This is a well-established medical pathway, and it's something many women pursue when they want biological children but can't carry them. So let's apply this to Meghan's situation. If she had a hysterectomy at 28, but her ovaries were preserved, then biologically, she could still have children. The eggs would be hers, the DNA would be hers, but the pregnancy would be carried by someone else, a surrogate. And that's where the timeline starts to crack. Because if Archie and Lilibet were born via surrogate, then everything we've been shown, the baby bump photos, the hand-on-belly poses, the carefully staged pregnancy announcements, the birth stories, would need to be re-examined. And more importantly, it would raise the question, why keep it secret? Surrogacy isn't shameful. It's not illegal in the UK. High-profile women have been open about using surrogates, and the public has largely been supportive. So why, if Meghan used a surrogate, would there be such intense secrecy around it? Some sources suggest the answer lies in royal protocol. The line of succession is governed by strict rules, many of which date back centuries. While there's no explicit law banning surrogacy, the situation has never been tested in a royal context. If a child born via surrogate were to be included in the line of succession, it would set a precedent with legal, constitutional, and historical implications that the palace might not have been prepared to handle. Others suggest the secrecy might be personal. Meghan has built much of her public image around authenticity, vulnerability, and relatability. The image of a glowing pregnant woman, radiant and maternal, is a powerful one. If that image were replaced with the reality of surrogacy, it might not carry the same emotional weight with the public. And in a world where perception is everything, that matters. But here's the part that makes people pause. If Meghan did use a surrogate, and if the palace knew about it, then why didn't they address it? Why allow speculation to spiral for years when a simple statement could have clarified everything? The silence, once again, becomes its own story. Now, Let's talk about what happens to a woman's body after a hysterectomy, because this is where the physical evidence, or lack thereof, starts to matter. When a woman has a hysterectomy, especially one that includes removal of the ovaries, her body goes through immediate and dramatic changes. If the ovaries are removed, she enters surgical menopause. That means hot flashes, mood swings, changes in skin texture, weight fluctuations, bone density loss, and a host of other symptoms that are difficult to hide. Even if the ovaries are left intact, a hysterectomy still causes hormonal shifts. The body has to adjust to the absence of the uterus, and many women report changes in energy, libido, and overall well-being. So here's the question. If Meghan had a hysterectomy at 28, would we have seen signs of it in her public appearances over the following years? Would there have been subtle indicators, weight changes, skin changes, energy levels, that something significant had happened? According to those who followed Meghan's career closely, there's no obvious evidence of surgical menopause or post-hysterectomy recovery. But then again, with the right medical care, hormone replacement therapy, wellness routines, professional stylists, those signs can be minimized or hidden entirely. And that brings us back to the core issue. We're left with a claim that can't be easily proven or disproven, surrounded by a timeline that raises more questions than it answers. Can you imagine this? Living in a world where your body's medical history becomes a subject of public debate, where every photo is scrutinized, every statement analyzed, every choice questioned.
It's invasive. It's uncomfortable. And it's exactly where we find ourselves with Meghan Markle.
So let me ask you, if Meghan did have a hysterectomy, do you think she should have disclosed it? Or is a woman's medical history, even a public figure's, something that should remain private? Before you answer, consider this. When you're a member of the royal family, when your children are in the line of succession, when your story is woven into the constitutional fabric of a nation, does privacy still apply?
Or does the public have a right to know?
It's a difficult question. And it's one we're going to keep wrestling with as we move deeper into this story. Next, we're going to look at the pregnancies themselves, the timelines, the photos, the inconsistencies that have fueled speculation for years. Because if Samantha's claim has any merit, then the evidence should be visible.
The cracks should be there.
And trust me, when you see what we're about to show you, those cracks become impossible to ignore.
Let's go back to 2018.
Meghan and Harry announced their pregnancy in October, just months after their fairytale wedding.
The world was thrilled.
A royal baby was coming, and this one felt different, modern, diverse, full of hope and promise. But almost immediately, something felt off. Now, before I go any further, I want to be clear. Pregnancy looks different on every woman. Bodies are unique. Genetics, fitness levels, clothing choices, all of these affect how a baby bump appears. So when people started noticing inconsistencies in Meghan's pregnancy, it was easy to dismiss them as nitpicking, as cruel scrutiny of a woman's body, as conspiracy theories run wild. But here's the thing, the inconsistencies weren't small.
They weren't subtle.
They were glaring, repeated, and visible in ways that even the most generous observer struggled to explain.
Let's start with the bump itself.
In photos taken just weeks apart, Meghan's belly appeared to change size dramatically, not gradually growing, as pregnancies typically do, but fluctuating in ways that defied basic biology. In some photos, the bump looked high and round, exactly as you'd expect in the third trimester. In others, taken days later, it looked smaller, lower, or oddly shaped. Now, skeptics will say, it's just the angle.
It's the dress. It's the way she's standing.
And sure, those factors matter. But when you line up dozens of photos chronologically, when you compare them side by side, the variations become harder to dismiss. And then there's the infamous video.
You know the one.
Meghan, sitting down in a purple dress, the bump appearing to fold or collapse inward as she bent forward. The clip went viral, spawning thousands of comments, frame-by-frame analyses, and heated debates.
Some said it was a trick of the fabric.
Others said it was proof of a prosthetic belly, a moon bump used by surrogates or women faking pregnancies. Meghan's team never directly addressed the video. They let it circulate, let people argue, and let the speculation grow. And that silence, once again, fueled more questions than answers.
Can you imagine this?
Being accused of faking your pregnancy, of wearing a fake belly, of deceiving the world about something as fundamental as carrying a child. If it weren't true, wouldn't you address it? Wouldn't you release medical records, or have your doctors confirm the pregnancy, or simply show more of your body to prove the skeptics wrong?
But Meghan didn't do any of that.
Instead, she retreated further into privacy, controlled every image, and limited public appearances to carefully staged photo opportunities. Now, let's talk about the birth itself, because this is where the timeline gets even stranger. Archie was born on May 6, 2019. Or at least, that's the official story. But here's where things get murky. The announcement of the birth came hours after it supposedly happened, which is unusual for royal births. Typically, there's a formal statement released almost immediately, a gathering of press outside the hospital, a sense of ceremonial tradition. But with Archie, everything was different. There was no hospital photo call. No doctors stepping out to confirm the delivery. No traditional easel placed outside Buckingham Palace with the handwritten announcement. Instead, the world got an Instagram post, a vague statement, and a single photo of Meghan and Harry cradling a blanket-wrapped baby whose face was barely visible. And then came the strangest detail. Meghan and Harry claimed they left the hospital, Portland Hospital, a private maternity clinic in London, just 2 hours after the birth.
2 hours.
Now, if you've ever given birth, or if you know anyone who has, you know that 2 hours is not enough time to deliver a baby, recover from labor, complete postpartum checks, fill out discharge paperwork, and travel home. It's medically improbable, and in many cases, it's not even permitted by hospital protocol.
So how did they do it?
Sources familiar with Portland Hospital procedures say that even for private, high-profile patients, the standard postpartum stay is at least 6 to 12 hours, sometimes longer if there are complications or concerns. 2 hours would be unprecedented, especially for a first-time mother. Unless, of course, Meghan wasn't the one giving birth. If Archie was born via surrogate, then the 2-hour timeline starts to make sense. Meghan could have arrived at the hospital after the birth, held the baby for photos, and left without ever going through labor herself. The surrogate, meanwhile, would have remained anonymous, out of sight, completing her own postpartum care in privacy.
It's a theory that fits the facts.
But it's also just a theory, one that, without confirmation, remains speculation. And yet, the speculation persists because the official story leaves so many gaps. Where are the medical records? Why was there no formal announcement from the palace physicians, as there had been for every other royal birth in modern history? Why did Meghan's due date seem to shift multiple times, from late April to early May to sometime in the spring? Why were there no photos of Meghan in active labor, no videos of her heading to the hospital, no glimpses of her in the immediate postpartum period when most new mothers are exhausted, swollen, and visibly recovering? Can you imagine this? The most famous family in the world, welcoming a new heir, and somehow managing to keep every single detail of the birth hidden from public view.
It's almost impressive in its secrecy. Almost.
But secrecy breeds suspicion. And when you combine that secrecy with the visual inconsistencies of the pregnancy, the strange timeline of the birth, and now Samantha's claim about a hysterectomy at 28, the picture that emerges is one that doesn't quite fit the narrative we've been given. Now, here's where I want to pause and ask you a question. Do you think it's possible that Meghan used a surrogate for Archie? And if so, do you think the palace knew? Or was this a secret that Meghan and Harry kept even from the family? Because if the palace didn't know, if they found out later that the child presented as a natural birth was actually born via surrogate, that's not just a family issue. That's a constitutional issue. That's a matter of succession, legitimacy, and trust that goes to the very core of the monarchy's stability. And if they did know, and chose to keep it quiet, then the question becomes, why? What were they protecting? Meghan's image? The institution's reputation? The line of succession itself?
These are the questions that matter.
These are the questions that Samantha's claim forces us to confront. Next, we're going to look at Lilibet's birth, which somehow managed to be even more secretive, even more controlled, and even more filled with unanswered questions than Archie's. Because if the first pregnancy raised eyebrows, the second one shattered any remaining trust. If Archie's birth was cloaked in secrecy, Lilibet's was buried under layers of it. Born on June 4, 2021, in Santa Barbara, California, Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor entered the world with even less fanfare, documentation, or public visibility than her brother. And this time, there wasn't even the pretense of royal protocol or palace involvement. This was a fully private, American birth, thousands of miles from Buckingham Palace, with no oversight, no witnesses, and no official confirmation beyond a carefully worded press release. Let's start with what we know, or rather, what we were told. According to Meghan and Harry's spokesperson, Lilibet was born at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, a small, private facility known for its discretion and high-end maternity services. The birth was described as healthy and uneventful, with both mother and baby doing well. A single black and white photo was released weeks later, showing Meghan holding a baby with Harry beside her, all three smiling in soft, filtered lighting.
And that was it. No hospital records were made public.
No doctors stepped forward to confirm the delivery. No birth certificate was filed publicly. California allows delayed filings for privacy reasons. No photos of Meghan visibly pregnant in the weeks leading up to the birth. No post-birth recovery photos. No signs of the physical toll that childbirth takes on a woman's body. It was as if Lilibet simply appeared, fully formed, with no evidence of the 9-month journey that supposedly preceded her arrival. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, Meghan and Harry had left the royal family by then. They are private citizens.
They don't owe the public anything.
And legally, you're right. Once they stepped back from royal duties, they were no longer bound by the same expectations of transparency. But here's the problem. Their children are still in the line of succession.
Archie is 6th in line. Lilibet is 7th.
They are, by definition, part of the British monarchy's constitutional framework. And when it comes to matters of succession, privacy and protocol collide in complicated ways. Historically, royal births have always been witnessed. Not by the general public, but by officials, doctors, and sometimes even government representatives, to ensure that the child being presented is indeed the legitimate heir. This tradition dates back centuries, rooted in times when questions of legitimacy could spark wars, rebellions, and dynastic crises.
But with Lilibet, there were no witnesses. No palace officials.
No representatives from the British government. No Anglican clergy present for a formal blessing or acknowledgement. It was a birth that, for all intents and purposes, existed only because Meghan and Harry said it did.
And that's where the doubts begin to creep in. Can you imagine this?
A child born into one of the most scrutinized families in the world, and yet there's no independent confirmation, no medical documentation, no third-party verification of the most basic facts, that the pregnancy happened, that the birth occurred, that the child is who they say she is.
Now, I'm not saying Lilibet doesn't exist.
Photos of her have been released, though sparingly and always carefully controlled. But the lack of documentation, the absence of any verifiable paper trail, the complete control over every image and statement, it creates a vacuum where questions flourish. And when you add Samantha's hysterectomy claim into the mix, those questions become impossible to ignore. If Meghan had a hysterectomy at 28, then she physically could not have carried Lilibet. The pregnancy would have to have been carried by a surrogate, just as Archie's would have been. And if that's the case, then why the elaborate charade? Why the bump photos, the few that exist?
Why the complete silence on the medical realities?
Some sources suggest that by the time Lilibet was conceived, Meghan and Harry had already left the royal family, already burned bridges with the palace, already built a new life in California where American privacy laws are far more protective than British protocols. In that context, using a surrogate wouldn't be scandalous. It would be practical, perhaps even necessary if Meghan's body couldn't carry a pregnancy. But the secrecy suggests something deeper. It suggests that either Meghan and Harry were protecting a truth they didn't want public, or that the circumstances surrounding Lilibet's birth were complicated in ways that simple surrogacy wouldn't explain. And then there's the timeline itself, which, once again, raises eyebrows. Meghan announced her pregnancy with Lilibet in February 2021, during the infamous Oprah interview. It was a carefully timed reveal, designed for maximum emotional impact during a broadcast that was already filled with explosive claims about the royal family. But here's the thing, the announcement was vague.
No due date was given. No details about how far along she was.
Just a soft-focus confirmation that another baby was on the way. By the time Lilibet was supposedly born in early June, that would put the pregnancy timeline at roughly 3 to 4 months from the announcement, meaning Meghan would have been about 5 to 6 months pregnant during the Oprah interview.
Now, look at the photos from that interview.
Meghan is sitting in a flowing dress, her posture relaxed, her belly visible but not prominently featured. And here's where people start to pause. For a woman 5 to 6 months pregnant, especially with a second child, when bumps typically show earlier and larger, Meghan's midsection looked surprisingly flat.
Not impossible, but unusual.
Especially when compared to photos of other pregnant women at similar stages. Once again, skeptics will say it's the dress, the camera angle, the way she's sitting. And once again, those explanations work, until you compare dozens of photos, videos, and public appearances from that period, and the bump seems to appear and disappear depending on the day, the outfit, or the lighting. Can you imagine this? announcing a pregnancy on global television, in one of the most watched interviews of the decade, and somehow managing to keep the physical evidence of that pregnancy so carefully controlled that people are left guessing whether it's real.
And then there's the birth certificate issue.
In California, birth certificates are public records unless a formal request for privacy is filed. According to sources familiar with the process, no publicly accessible birth certificate for Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor was ever filed with Santa Barbara County. That doesn't mean one doesn't exist. It could be sealed, delayed, or filed under different names for security reasons. But the absence of a public record, combined with the lack of any other documentation, leaves yet another gap in the story.
So let's step back and look at the pattern that's emerging.
With Archie, strange bump inconsistencies. A 2-hour hospital stay. No medical confirmation.
Minimal photos. Complete control over the narrative.
With Lilibet, even less visibility.
No pregnancy photos to speak of. A birth with no witnesses.
No documentation. A child who exists in carefully curated images but nowhere else. And threading through both pregnancies, Samantha's claim that Meghan had a hysterectomy at 28, making natural pregnancy physically impossible. Now, here's the question I want you to sit with: if Meghan did use a surrogate for both children, and if that's the truth behind all the secrecy, the inconsistencies, and the controlled narratives, then why not just admit it?
Surrogacy isn't shameful. It's not illegal.
Celebrities have been open about it, and the public has been largely supportive.
Kim Kardashian used surrogates.
Nicole Kidman has been open about her fertility struggles.
Sarah Jessica Parker spoke about her surrogacy journey, and none of them faced public backlash for it.
So why would Meghan, a woman who has built her brand on authenticity and vulnerability, choose to hide something that millions of women around the world would relate to and support? Unless the issue isn't surrogacy itself, but something more complicated. Something tied to royal protocol, constitutional law, or questions of legitimacy that go far beyond personal medical choices. We'll explore those possibilities in the next chapter. But before we move on, I want to hear from you. Do you think Meghan used a surrogate? And if she did, do you think she should have been open about it? Or was she right to keep it private? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is far from over. So far, we've talked about Samantha's claim, the medical realities of hysterectomies, and the strange inconsistencies surrounding both of Meghan's pregnancies. But there's one player in this story we haven't fully addressed yet: Buckingham Palace. Because here's the thing. If Samantha's claim is true, if Meghan did have a hysterectomy at 28, if Archie and Lilibet were born via surrogate, then the palace almost certainly knows. Royal births, especially those involving children in the line of succession, don't happen in a vacuum. There are protocols, procedures, legal requirements, and constitutional considerations that make secrecy nearly impossible. So the question becomes, what does the palace know, and why have they said nothing?
Let's start with the protocols.
Historically, royal births have been documented, witnessed, and verified by officials to ensure legitimacy. This isn't paranoia, it's centuries of legal precedent designed to prevent disputes over succession. The Home Secretary used to be present at royal births, a tradition that lasted until 1948, when King George VI decided it was outdated. But even without that, royal physicians still document births, palace officials still oversee the process, and records are still kept. But with Archie and Lilibet, those protocols seem to have been bypassed entirely. There's no indication that palace officials were present at either birth. No royal physicians signed off on medical records. No formal statements from Buckingham Palace confirming the details. Just press releases from Meghan and Harry's team, and the palace's quiet acknowledgement that, yes, babies were born.
Can you imagine this?
The palace, an institution that thrives on order, tradition, and documentation, simply accepting Meghan and Harry's word without independent verification.
It's almost unthinkable. Unless they knew something the rest of us didn't.